So, we're finally doing this one. Imagine leaving your house right now. You don't pack a bag, you don't finish your coffee, you just walk out the door, get on a boat, and never come back for the rest of your life. That's exactly what happened to the entire population of Portlock, Alaska around 1950. If you dig up the official explanation, specifically the May 2024 report from the Alaska Department of Labor, you'll find Portlock filed neatly under ghost towns. The state's autopsy of the village is incredibly bureaucratic. It blames the closure on the end of the chromite mining boom and the decline of the cannery. Essentially, the government claims this town died of natural causes, economic starvation. But economic depressions are slow. They look like peeling paint and families drifting away over a decade. They don't look like a mass exodus where dozens of hardened frontiersmen, people who carved a living out of the harshest wilderness on earth, fled in a single season. Local oral histories tell a much darker story than the Department of Labor. They don't mention economics. They mention a specific year, 1949, and a specific reason for leaving. They didn't leave because the money ran out. They left because something in the woods started hunting them. Before we get to the bodies, we need to understand the crime scene. The southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula is geologically hostile. According to the Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys, specifically their work on the Naptown glaciation, this entire landscape was carved by massive ice sheets retreating about 11,000 years ago. They left behind a jagged, moody terrain of deep fjords and temperate rainforests that look beautiful on a postcard, but are functionally designed to kill you. And yet, people thrived here. Archaeological data from the Alutiiq Museum confirms that Alutiiq and Sugpiaq ancestors have occupied the East Coast for at least 7,500 years. These were the masters of the maritime environment. They hunted whales from skinned boats in freezing waters. They survived the Russian fur trade exploitation under Baranov in the late 1700s, a brutal period of forced labor and disease detailed in the Chugach heritage records. They weathered glacial shifts, starvation, and colonial occupation. They weren't people who scared easily, which makes the oral history of Portlock so unnerving. Because while the Alutiiq people built villages along this coastline, harvesting salmon, seal, and otter, they historically gave Portlock a wide berth. It wasn't a lack of resources. The bay is a perfect natural harbor, teeming with salmon. But in a local lore recorded by historians like Larry Baxter and the Alaska Magazine Archives, this specific inlet was occupied territory. The elders referred to a presence in the high timber. They didn't call it Bigfoot. That's a branding term for tourists in Washington state. The name whispered in these fjords was Nantiinaq. Roughly translated, it means half man, half beast. But that translation feels a bit academic. Based on the fear it inspired, a better translation might be the reason we don't go into that valley. That's a good one. For thousands of years, the agreement was simple. The humans stayed on the beach, and the Nantiinaq kept the woods. It was a Cold War, a territorial standoff. But to enforce this border, the creature relied on weaponized empathy. Larry Baxter's historical compilation, Abandoned, details accounts of witnesses hearing the wails of a woman in distress or a crying child deep in the timber. A strategy designed to run a phishing scam on the hunter's protective instincts. This is the behavior of a primate that understands leverage. Before the creature appears, the environment itself seems to turn hostile. Hunters report a phenomenon known locally as alec, a sudden crushing disorientation where the woods go dead silent. This aligns perfectly with modern bioacoustics research on infrasound, as demonstrated by Elizabeth von Muggenthaler at the Acoustical Society of America. Large predators like tigers emit low-frequency waves around 18 Hz to physically stun prey. The Alutiiq hunters were likely documenting the physiological effects of being hit by nature's own subwoofer. Survival in Portlock demanded strict adherence to local zoning laws. You never hunted alone. You never whistled in the timber. And if you heard wood knocking, you retreated. The indigenous population maintained an uneasy truce with the Nantiinaq for 7 millennia by respecting these boundaries. The Americans, however, arrived with steam engines and the arrogance of the industrial age. The cannery managers brought a spreadsheet to a knife fight. They saw the forest as raw inventory, ignored the protocols, and were the first to discover that the rent was due. In 1931, the theoretical threat started leaving bodies. Andrew Camlock despised the cannery's industrial ceiling enough to bet his life on independent logging. Unfortunately, operating solo in Portlock meant working without an HR department or a safety net. According to oral history preserved by Melania Helen Kell, Camlock's final weeks involved a campaign of psychological warfare that would break a lesser man. Lunch pails vanished, axe handles snapped like dried twigs. The local wildlife essentially engaged in a game of gaslight the human. The crime scene dictates the narrative. Camlock stands alone in the late evening. He reaches for his axe and finds it missing again. Frustration overrides survival instincts. He screams into the tree line, attempting to negotiate a truce with the apex predator of the region. He pleads his case as a father just trying to feed his family. The forest responds with immediate kinetic violence. A massive gray entity breaks cover and closes the distance. Camlock attempts to retreat, but his opponent brought artillery. The creature hoists a log skidder, a cast iron sled weighing roughly 400 pounds. For context, moving a skidder requires a winch, a team of men, and a lot of cursing. The creature throws it like a frisbee. The May 2024 report from the Alaska Department of Labor files this death under industrial accidents, likely because their form lacked a checkbox for homicide by cryptid. But the men who recovered Camlock's body stared at the physics equation that refused to balance. Gravity pulls objects down. Only a massive biological catapult propels 400 pounds of iron horizontally across the clearing. If Andrew Camlock served as the warning shot, Tom Larson finally acknowledged the declaration of war. Larson earned his living on the tidal flats of Portlock, managing fish traps that usually caught salmon and occasionally annoyed the local bears. But in 1939, his morning commute interrupted a felony in progress. He arrived at his trap to find it under new management. Standard Alaskan wildlife raids involve splintered wood and brute force. Larson witnessed precision engineering. A massive, dark-haired figure stood waist-deep in the freezing water, manipulating the trap's latch mechanism with a casual dexterity of a safecracker. The creature extracted the salmon, showcasing an understanding of the mechanics that wildlife shouldn't possess. At this moment, Larson realized the depth of his own complacency. According to Larry Baxter's Abandoned, Larson had walked to his traps unarmed, a habit born of routine safety. He was forced to retreat to his cabin, retrieve his rifle, and return to the scene. A terrifying round trip that gave him ample time to reconsider his career choices. He returned to find the thief still browsing. Larson raised his rifle, putting the intruder in his scope. He was one trigger pull away from turning this anomaly into a rug. He held his fire. Later retellings in the Redoubt Reporter cite a specific reason for his pacifism. Through the optics, he looked into a face that mirrored his own. He saw features that possessed too much humanity to shoot without a trial. The creature finished its meal, offered Larson a look of supreme indifference, and walked upright and smooth into the tree line. Most outdoorsmen would buy a bigger gun. Larson simply surrendered. He abandoned his gear, left the bay, and retired from the cryptozoology business immediately. As he told the locals later, the woods belonged to something else now, and he refused to pay rent. By 1946, the cannery logs reveal a town in freefall. The workforce engaged in a remarkably sensible strike. They refused to step foot in the tree line. It seems that the standard hourly rate for processing salmon failed to cover the hazard of being hunted for sport. The siege began with a weaponized soundscape. In linguistic interviews from the 1980s by Jeff Lear, resident Circus Moonin described an ear-splitting whistling that intensified until the witnesses' ears physically rang. Fiona Swadden and Tupu El Pulu's 1979 ethnography, Old Beliefs, corroborates this detail, noting the creature had abandoned human speech entirely for these high-frequency blasts. This implies a biological strategy designed to clear the territory of unwanted guests. Then came the visual confirmation that changed the threat level entirely. Moonin's testimony describes seeing the Nantiinaq walking bipedally along the beach, openly carrying a club. This description is where the plausible deniability evaporates. You can explain away claw marks and smashed brush as a bear or a moose pushed too far, but a figure walking upright along the shoreline with a weapon in its hand implies premeditation, that someone is patrolling. That distinct tool-using behavior fueled the darkest rumor in town. Native elder Melania Kell's account details the local conviction that a hunter had succumbed to the curse and transformed, retaining just enough memory to return home. He returned to the village with a singular domestic obsession, claiming his wife. Portlock responded to this threat with martial law. Kell recalls that children were strictly forbidden from leaving their homes without adult escorts. The era of free-range childhood ended. Families found themselves under house arrest, hiding from a neighbor who had traded his humanity for a thick coat of hair and a heavy wooden club. The community cracked under the strain of the siege that moved from the industrial outskirts to their own front doors. The timeline constructed by Larry Baxter identifies 1949 as the year the Nantiinaq stopped lurking and started demonstrating physics-defying mechanics. Citing records from SasquatchTracker.com, Baxter documents a tracking event that effectively ended any debate about what the locals were dealing with. Witnesses followed a fresh set of moose tracks through the snow. Flanking the animal's path were the now familiar 18-inch bipedal prints, shadowing the prey. The trail eventually led to a scene of violent disturbance. Snow churned up, branches broken, and the unmistakable sign of a struggle. At the center of the chaos, the moose tracks simply stopped. The 18-inch prints did not. They continued up the mountain deeper into the terrain. We need to pause and appreciate the sheer mechanical impossibility of this scene. An adult Alaskan bull moose weighs between 1,200 and 1,600 pounds. A grizzly bear, the apex predator of the region, drags its kills, leaving a wide, bloody swath of displacement in the earth. This predator apparently hoisted 3/4 of a ton of dead weight off the ground and walked away with it on an incline. This 1949 incident shifted the community's sphere from biological to supernatural. A bear can kill you, a pack of wolves can hunt you, but a creature that treats a 1,500-pound moose like a packed lunch operates on a level of strength that renders rifles and locked doors statistically insignificant. The psychological damage actually began a year prior. Baxter's timeline lists a grim entry for 1948, again sourced from SasquatchTracker.com. Hunters found mutilated. This singular line likely birthed the various severed head stories that populates modern internet threads about Portlock. The details in the oral history are gruesome, often involving bodies washed ashore or dismembered remains found near the cannery. However, the official state archives tells a different, quieter story. There are no death certificates from 1948 or 1949 listing mutilation or homicide as the cause of death in the Portlock area. The bureaucratic record remains perfectly clean. This discrepancy between the paper trail and the oral history defines the Portlock exodus. To the historian, the lack of bodies suggests mass hysteria or exaggerated folklore. To the families living in those shacks in 1949, the truth was irrelevant. They saw the tracks. They heard the whistling. They knew about the mutilated hunters regardless of what the coroner and Homer wrote down. The fear proved absolute. By 1950, the town, once a booming industrial hub, was functionally dead. The postmaster, the final representative of federal order, locked the doors and departed that same year. Portlock did not fade away due to economic decline. It was evacuated. The bureaucratic death of Portlock makes for dry reading. Larry Baxter's abandon attributes the town's decline to a 1938 fire that gutted the cannery complex. This single event severed the town's financial aorta. To a distant observer in Juneau, the fire provided a clean explanation for the population drift. The residents, however, remained stubborn. They rebuilt structures and pivoted industries. The post office continued to process mail, and the chromite boom of the early 40s injected a final dose of industrial capital into a dying settlement. The town essentially continued to operate on borrowed time. The historical record for the 1940s suffers from schizophrenia. On one hand, Abandon introduces us to figures like Joe Karloff, an entrepreneur attempting to normalize the region with a mink farm operation. His daily logs suggest a functioning, albeit remote, frontier life. Simultaneously, the region was hemorrhaging people. To understand the panic of the 1940s, recall the unresolved trauma of 1931 that we covered earlier. The shadow of Andrew Kaumluck still loomed large over the town, a death the coroner called an accident, but the family called a Nantiinaq attack. In that same year, a prospector walked into the tree line and vanished. In Abandon, Larry Baxter notes that while the man was later dramatized as Hamish, his actual name has been lost to history. In a 2009 interview with the Homer Tribune, Elder Simone Kozenkoff summarized the disappearance with chilling brevity. The man went up there one time and never came back. I swear that's a real quote. By the time Joe Karloff was tending his mink in the mid-40s, the violence had escalated. Baxter's research cites multiple articles from the era describing bodies washing up in the lagoon. The reports specifically note the mutilation was, in a way, a bear would not do. Fiona Swandon and Tupu Elpulu's Old Belief corroborates this atmosphere of siege, documenting caveman or Portlock accounts where the local population lived under a strict fear-induced curfew. The timeline terminates in 1950. The Postal Service archives record the final closure of the Portlock office, officially citing the exhaustion of the chrome mine. Government reports describe an orderly economic migration to Navalek. The physical evidence contradicts the official narrative of an orderly departure. Deep in the overgrowth near the rotting remains of a cabin with a corrugated orange roof sits a massive cast iron flywheel engine. Photographs from Larry Baxter's 2018 expedition, published in Abandon, capture this machinery rusting in the wild. This represents a significant financial asset in 1950s currency. It is heavy, durable, and valuable. Leaving such an asset behind signals a catastrophic loss of priority for material wealth. The rusted flywheel serves as a monument to panic. The residents fled the zip code, and the forest began the slow work of reclaiming the evidence. The bureaucracy washed its hand of Portlock in 1951. But the area remains occupied. In 1973, Alaskan Adventure Journal reported that 3 hunters took their skiff into Portlock to escape a storm. They sought refuge in a decaying cannery bunkhouse, one of the few structures still standing against the elements. Their shelter became a siege. Throughout the night, something heavy circled the building. The hunters described the footsteps as bipedal and heavy enough to shudder the floorboards. This sentry paced the perimeter until dawn. They remained huddled inside for 2 days, listening to the heavy gate grind into the gravel, until the weather broke enough for an escape. 45 years later, the modern era arrived in Portlock. In his book, Abandoned, Larry Baxter details the 2018 expedition led by Stephen Major, a researcher and founder of the Extreme Expeditions Northwest. They approached the bay aboard a Puckuk vessel, a heavy-duty boat designed for the punishing Alaskan coast. They found immediate anomalies. 40 feet up a sheer cliff face, inaccessible to the tide, the team discovered a cache of modern refuse. Plastic crates, radios, fishing gear. This collection suggests a nest. Animals with that level of dexterity and hoarding instinct are rare in the Alaskan wilderness. The expedition pushed inland to an area Major christened the Valley of Death. Here, the technology validated the folklore. During a night watch, the team's thermal imaging camera captured a distinct heat signature. Baxter describes the thermal return as having a Donkey Kong shape. Massive upper body, no neck, and a tapered waist. The figure stood its ground, raising its arms in a display of aggression that primate researchers call posturing. Stephen Major later secured a visual confirmation. He reported a tall, bipedal figure with white hair and a distinct mane running down its back, a white mohawk. This observation aligns perfectly with the hairy man descriptions from the 1930s. The team returned in May 2019 aboard the Kingpin to push the investigation further. This trip revealed a new complication. Larry Baxter was living a double life. At the time, Baxter was an active duty police officer. He kept his involvement in cryptozoology strictly classified to avoid professional ridicule or being outed to his department. This secrecy nearly collapsed when Alaska State troopers approached the Kingpin. Captain Gabe, the vessel's skipper, had 2 concerns. First, the trooper's boat lacked fenders and threatened to scratch his paint, and second, he had to shield his client's identity. Baxter hid in the galley, listening to a conversation that descended into vaudevillian absurdity. The troopers demanded to see hunting licenses. Captain Gabe refused, citing the expedition's true purpose. I swear to God, this is a real conversation, and I'm just gonna try to act it out for you, because... oh my! So we have Captain Gabe. No one has a license. They aren't hunting. They're filming a show on Bigfoot. The trooper, confused by the honesty, persisted. We want to check their hunting licenses. They aren't hunting. They are filming a show on Bigfoot. They don't have a hunting licenses. The circular argument continued until the troopers, perhaps baffled by the specific stupidity of the claim, motored away. Baxter's secret remained safe, but the environment itself grew hostile. Baxter's expedition logs describes a clockwork weather phenomenon. The storms intensified precisely when the team geared up to go ashore and cleared the moment they retreated to the galley. The timing implies an intelligent response from the environment. The hostility escalated to visual camouflage. Near the remains of the red-roofed cabin, Baxter observed a translucent shimmering in the trees. A distortion in the air 10 feet off the ground, moving with intent. The occupant of Portlock appears to have adapted to human optics. The expedition ended with a violent eviction. The team woke to a massive boom and the sensation of the boat vibrating. Captain Gabe insisted an earthquake on the water would feel different, but Baxter maintained the ground shook. They pulled anchor immediately. The message was clear. The lease has expired. We pivot from the physical expeditions to the historical database to build a behavioral profile. The local Dena'ina people maintain a specific classification for this entity, recorded in Peter Kalforsky's 1991 ethnohistorical collection. They use the word Nantiinaq. The translation is specific, the ones who steal us. This etymology focuses entirely on the primary threat, abduction. The name serves strictly as a kidnapping charge. To understand the nature of this abduction, we look to the oral history preserved by Elder Melania Kale in her 2014 interview. She recounts the case of a hunter in Dogfish Bay who voluntarily defected from the human race. He disembarked his boat and ordered his companions to leave him, stating his intention to join the Nantiinaq. His final message to his wife was a practical instruction to stay indoors, as he would return for her only after he had, in his words, changed into thick fur. He framed his departure as a simple exchange. He traded his marriage for a winter coat. This account provides a crucial forensic detail regarding communication. The hunter warned that he would lose the ability to speak and would eventually only be able to whistle. That auditory marker surfaces in the written record from 1923. Sergis Moonen, a 16-year-old fisherman at the time, filed a report describing a piercing, ear-splitting whistling near a creek. He noted that the sound intensified until it had caused physical pain. A bear roar triggers a primal fight response, but a disembodied human whistle in deep timber triggers deep psychological confusion. It implies you are being watched by something that is calculating. The physical evidence found by modern expeditions correlates directly with the physiological descriptions in the lore. In their 1979 text, Old Beliefs, Fiona Swandon and Tupu Elpulu's document the caveman of Portlock legend, which offers a biological explanation for the creature's size. The text states, "Soon his shoes worn out, so his feet became big." We see the result of that transformation in the photograph from the recent expedition. The depression in the substrate sits next to a size 10.5 boot for scale. The mud here is compacted significantly deeper than the boot print, indicating a bipedal entity with a mass in the 600 to 800 pound range. At that weight, biology becomes a structural engineering problem. The behavioral profile also suggests a lingering attachment to human artifacts. During the 2018 expedition, Larry Baxter documented this anomalous cache of plastic totes, radios, and debris dragged into the dense timber. A bear scatters trash in a chaotic search for calories. This pile demonstrates intentional curation. The entity collected these items, suggesting curiosity and a collector's mindset. We are dealing with an apex predator that maintains a sentimental collection of our garbage. Sergis Moonen's 1923 observation provides the final lethal component of this profile. He observed the creature walking the beach carrying a club. This confirms we are tracking an entity that understands the mechanics of leverage and tool use. The Nantiinaq stands as an indigenous memory of a neighbor who is highly territorial, dangerously strong, and remarkably consistent in its eviction notices. Skeptics like Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid podcast offer a sanitized version of events, arguing Portlock is a case study in macroeconomics and overactive imaginations. He claims the town died simply because chrome prices dropped and the cannery burned down. This flywheel remains in the brush today. Industrial equipment of this caliber represents a massive capital investment. When a town dies economically, assets are liquidated. Machinery is stripped, sold, or moved to the next job site. The presence of heavy machinery left to rust in the rain serves as physical proof of an evacuation. You leave expensive tools behind only when the cost of retrieving them exceeds the value of your life. The second theory posits animal misidentification. A black bear, a moose, or perhaps a massive coastal brown bear viewed through the lens of fog and fear. During the 2018 expedition, retired police investigator Larry Baxter documented this cache in the deep woods. Bears are agents of chaos. They destroy campsites to access food. This pile reveals a different pattern entirely. Totes, radios, and non-food items were removed from the shoreline and deliberately cached inland. This behavior demonstrates curiosity and curation. Biology grants bears the instinct to scavenge. It does not grant them the intelligence to hoard technology. Finally, we have the theory of mass hysteria. The idea that the town simply scared itself to death through a feedback loop of collective delusion. Hysteria is an emotion. It resides in the mind. Physics resides in the mud. This track, photographed next to a size 10.5 boot for scale, shows soil compressions nearly 2 inches deeper than the control. To achieve this level of compression in compacted soil requires a biological mass exceeding 600 pounds. A panic attack cannot manipulate the density of the earth. Portlock today is deceptively peaceful. The shoreline that once hosted a bustling community is now a quiet scar on the Kenai Peninsula. The rotting pilings and collapsed timbers are the only gravestones the town ever received. The cannery workers left because they refused to get off the boat. The 2018 expedition team, including Baxter, went in with modern firearms and GPS, yet they reported the same heavy, watching silence that drove the original residents out in 1949. We have stripped away the comfortable explanations. The economic data contradicts the speed of the exodus. The biological evidence defies the behavior of known predators. The soil compaction proves a physical, heavy presence. We are left holding two uncomfortable realities. Option A, we share this continent with a relic hominid, an apex predator that has managed to live in the blind spot of modern science. Or option B, the Supac elders were correct. The Nantiinaq operates outside the laws of biology because it is a spiritual manifestation, a curse. If you had to spend one night alone in the ruins of Portlock, which reality would you prefer? An animal you can shoot, or a spirit you can't? Tell me your choice in the comments below. The silence at Portlock is heavy, but it sits in the same family as many other cases we cover. If you want to dig deeper into the stranger corners of cryptid history and haunted wilderness, YouTube has selected another investigation for you right here.